the Canadian government will now match the United States by removing all of Canada's tariffs on U.S. goods specifically covered under CUSMA.
Now, almost a month later, we've learned that's actually not what happened.
That the Liberal government quietly dropped more of those tariffs than advertised.
Canadians woke up to a revelation that cuts deeper than politics. Prime Minister Mark Carney had promised to match Washington's tariff policy, claiming that Canada would only lift retaliatory duties on goods covered by the Free Trade Agreement. But a CBC investigation exposed the truth. Ottawa quietly erased nearly all counter-tariffs, sparing only steel, aluminum, and autos. What was presented as toughness was in reality surrender. It was not a careful strategy, it was a decision hidden in an order in council, discovered only by journalists willing to dig. And with that secrecy, Carney's credibility cracked wide open. Instead of keeping leverage for upcoming talks, he disarmed Canada before the negotiations even began. For ordinary citizens, the message was clear. Their leader did not stand firm. He folded. While Carney was stripping away Canada's leverage, Donald Trump was doubling down. In late September, Washington rolled out a new wave of reciprocal tariffs, 25% on heavy trucks, 50% on metals, and up to 100% on branded pharmaceuticals. The White House was not improvising. It was building a pressure system designed to generate revenue and channel that money into domestic priorities like farm subsidies. Tariffs in America became a tool to project strength and fund resilience. Ottawa did the opposite. By dropping surtaxes across a wide spectrum of imports, the Carney government eliminated one of the last bargaining chips Canada held in cross-border talks. There was no replacement strategy, no offsetting plan. Canada surrendered bargaining power in exchange for a moment of short-term calm. One side used tariffs to build leverage. The other side threw theirs away. And with that asymmetry, the path to the 2026 CUSMA review tilted decisively toward Washington. The consequences are already visible. Importers may have felt temporary relief as surtaxes disappeared, but the wider Canadian economy absorbed the damage. Without counter-tariffs, Ottawa forfeited revenue that could have funded relief at home. Families still face high grocery bills, higher borrowing costs, and shrinking job security. Farmers and manufacturers who once counted on government support now see Ottawa running out of tools. The so-called adaptation is in fact an erosion of capacity. Beyond the numbers, the damage is personal. A household in Saskatchewan feels the pinch every week at the supermarket. An auto worker in Ontario wonders if the next round of layoffs will reach his factory. A small business owner in Quebec pays more for inputs but sees no policy roadmap to stabilize costs. These stories are not abstract. They are daily reminders that Ottawa's retreat has real victims, and those victims are ordinary Canadians. Polls reveal what people sense instinctively. Trust in Carney is fading. Since the tariff flip-flop, Conservative support has pulled ahead, even if only by a slim margin. Symbolically, that is devastating. It shows Canadians recognize the backfire. What was marketed as a clever trade adjustment now looks like an own goal. Rather than shielding the economy, Carney has cornered it. Rather than gaining strength for negotiations, he has walked Canada into weakness. The pattern is undeniable. Carney promised to face Trump with resolve. Instead, he delivered retreat, cloaked in silence. Every step taken without transparency deepens the sense of betrayal among Canadians who expected clarity and leadership. If this is the posture going into the CUSMA review, Ottawa will sit at the table with empty hands while Washington dictates terms. What began as a single misstep has become a warning sign. The Prime Minister has already burned through public trust, dismantled Canada's leverage, and left households paying the price. And unless this course changes, the backfire will not stop here. It will echo into 2026, when the future of Canada's trade relationship is decided not in Ottawa, but in Washington.
Bottles of Kentucky bourbon and Tennessee whiskey are whisked from BC store shelves days before the U.S. tariffs hit.
What's the plan for the ban on American booze?
I apologize, ban on?
American booze.
Oh, it's still going to be banned until they cut the tariffs, or we make a deal with them.
The shelves tell the story before the politicians do. In Ontario, more than 3,600 American liquor products have been stripped from the LCBO. Manitoba has yanked $80 million worth of bottles off the market. The government promised it was all part of a bold retaliation, a way to show Trump that Canada would not be pushed around. Ottawa wrapped it in patriotic slogans, plastering "Made in Canada" across supermarkets as if that alone could shield families from higher prices. The reality is different. What was sold as a strike of independence is starting to look more like an act of self-harm. The most visible casualty is alcohol. Spirits Canada reports sales of spirits nationwide dropped nearly 13% in just 2 months after the boycott began. With average monthly revenue at $575 million Canadian dollars, that equals $147 million in lost sales in March and April alone. Extend the timeline to half a year, and the damage could easily exceed $440 million. Provincial liquor boards like the LCBO in Ontario and the SAQ in Quebec face the humiliating prospect of pouring out unsold American stock worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Consumers did not switch loyally to domestic brands. Many simply stopped buying. Bars went quiet, shelves stayed bare, and the supposed pressure on Washington never materialized. American producers simply pivoted, redirecting shipments to Europe, Japan, and South Korea. Canada, meanwhile, was left counting its losses. For a brief moment, Ottawa bragged that Canadian products were cheaper. A weak dollar and counter-tariffs gave a few domestic firms a sales bump, but the comfort was as thin as a wine glass. Consumers quickly discovered fewer choices and higher prices on essentials, from avocados to aluminum cans. Restaurants faced rising costs, breweries paid more for packaging, and households paid more at checkout. Worse still, many American companies that Canadians were boycotting had subsidiaries employing Canadian workers. When those firms lose revenue, it is not Donald Trump's job numbers that shrink, it is Canadian jobs. Border communities felt the sting most. Crossings fell by almost a third, duty-free shops reported sales plunging up to 80%, and the spiral dragged down motels, gas stations, and restaurants. Towns that once lived on steady weekend traffic are staring at empty parking lots and closed signs. The irony could not be sharper. A boycott meant to defend local economies is instead draining them dry, one paycheck at a time. Families already squeezed by inflation now face rising liquor bills, higher grocery costs, and shrinking work hours. Ottawa tells them this is solidarity. On the ground, it feels like punishment. What began as a campaign to show strength has backfired spectacularly. Hundreds of millions of dollars in lost liquor sales, provincial budgets under strain, businesses bleeding, and border towns collapsing. Meanwhile, American distillers are barely flinching, their bottles welcomed abroad, their balance sheets steady. Trump gets to tell his voters that he stood firm and gave nothing away, while Canada is left explaining why consumers pay more and jobs disappear. The Buy Canadian movement was supposed to be a shield against American tariffs. Instead, it turned into a boomerang that slammed back into Canada's own economy. And the sobering question remains, if Ottawa cannot even win the fight over liquor, how will it stand up in the bigger battles still to come, over autos, agriculture, and lumber? Canadians may soon find out that the real hangover is only just beginning. And when it does, no amount of patriotic slogans will disguise the bitter aftertaste of policies that hurt the very people they were meant to protect.
Tariffs on canola came up unexpectedly. If they can come on fast, then come off fast. And the Chinese are just going to want something in return.
There's just no real answers and again, no real indication from our federal government as to what sort of support as producers we could be expecting in the future.
The entire system. It's time to walk away from this wrong-headed policy of the Trudeau era.
Canada thought it could look strong by slapping a 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles, lining itself up neatly beside Washington. But instead of gaining leverage, Canada walked straight into a trap. Beijing struck back with punishing tariffs of nearly 76% on Canadian canola, gutting a sector worth billions. Talks dragged on, yet nothing moved. It felt like déjà vu, a replay of Canada's struggle with the United States during the reciprocal tariff fight. Once again, the government promised farmers protection while offering no real solution. And once again, it is rural communities in Saskatchewan and beyond paying the price. Carney's ministers may boast about defending Canadian interests, but the truth is simple. China barely flinched, and Canada's farmers were left stranded. The government talks tough, but when the time comes to act, it has no answer. Scott Moe's mission to China was supposed to signal progress. Instead, it revealed just how cornered Ottawa has become. Chinese officials spoke politely about being willing to look ahead, but there was no commitment to remove tariffs on canola. The message was clear: Beijing will not trade canola relief for Canada's EV tariffs. What Ottawa hoped might be a quick swap has turned into a dead end. Yet Carney's government refuses to shift its position. Keeping the EV tariff intact may please Washington, but it leaves Canadian farmers bleeding. Every month of delay costs the canola industry hundreds of millions, piling up into billions of dollars in losses. Ottawa's only answer has been to roll out a temporary support package, a band-aid on a gaping wound. While officials urge patience, farm families see their markets collapsing and their livelihoods slipping away. And beneath the surface, Canada risks something even greater: the loss of credibility in international trade talks. If China senses weakness and Washington sees indecision, Canada could end up isolated, with fewer allies and even fewer options. The contrast with America is telling. When Canada faced Trump's reciprocal tariffs, it was at least shielded by the framework of USMCA. That deal gave Ottawa leverage, however limited, to hold the line. With China, there is no such safety net. The retaliation falls directly on producers, with no cushion and no backup plan. Canada finds itself trapped between two giants, unable to protect one of its most valuable agricultural exports. If Ottawa keeps the EV tariff, it risks losing its foothold in China's premium food market. If it backs down, it risks being branded weak in Washington. Either way, the damage falls on Canadians. The government claims to be playing the long game, but to most citizens it looks more like a losing game. Every choice exposes just how little room Ottawa truly has to maneuver. Today, Canada faces double pressure like never before. From the South, America demands loyalty on EV tariffs and uses trade as leverage to reshape supply chains. From the East, China punishes Canadian agriculture to force concessions. Stuck in the middle, Carney's government has delivered nothing but uncertainty. Farmers see lost contracts, households face rising costs, automakers hesitate to invest. And while all this unfolds, Ottawa dithers with flip-flops on its own EV mandate at home. The bigger picture is undeniable. Carney's government set out to project strength. Instead, it triggered retaliation abroad and paralysis at home. Canada is squeezed between two superpowers, without a clear strategy, without a plan, and without a way out. Unless leadership changes course, the backfire will only grow worse, leaving Canadians to carry the weight of a policy that never should have been pursued in the first place.
Increase. We're going to bring it from 25% to 50%, the tariffs on steel into the United States of America.
Tariffs, we know fully it's going to impact workers on both sides of the borders. Trump has basically thrown our supply system and economies into chaos.
Trump's steel and aluminum tariffs strike at the heart of Canada's industry, and Carney opened the door for Washington by pulling back retaliation. These metals are not minor commodities. They are the backbone of Canadian manufacturing, feeding auto plants in Ontario, aerospace in Quebec, and infrastructure projects nationwide. For months, Ottawa promised to stand firm. Then, Carney shifted course.
A wide swath of Canada's retaliatory tariffs slapped on U.S. goods will be eliminated. But the Prime Minister says those on steel, aluminum, and autos will remain.
His government removed most counter-tariffs on U.S. goods, while keeping only steel, aluminum, and autos under retaliation. He called it strategic patience, but to Canadians, it looked like retreat. Washington quickly labeled the move constructive. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc was hosted in Washington by Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick for a 90-minute session. It was cordial, even described as productive, yet it produced no concrete concessions. Prices at home continued climbing. Workers saw no relief. Trump still controlled the pace, while Canada waited for outcomes that never came. By narrowing retaliation, Ottawa showed it was willing to absorb punishment while hoping for movement from Washington that remained elusive. With no breakthrough in the U.S. Capitol, Carney turned to Europe. He stood beside leaders in Berlin, Warsaw, and Riga, promising submarine contracts, critical mineral partnerships, and an expanded military presence in Latvia. The images played well on television, but at home, the crisis was plain. Steel and aluminum tariffs choking Canadian industries. Europe may one day buy more Canadian exports, but long-term promises do not pay today's bills. Even conservative commentators pointed out the gap. Activity is not achievement. Summits and declarations may fill schedules, but they do not cover mortgage payments in Hamilton. They do not save shifts in Sault Ste. Marie, and they do not keep smelters alive in Saguenay. Trump sees this clearly. Each handshake in Europe signals to him that Ottawa is chasing optics, while the real fight remains unresolved. For Trump, that means Canada is drifting, not defending.
Since steel tariffs between Canada and the U.S. came into effect, this Quebec food can maker has seen its sales more than double.
The economic toll is already visible. In Quebec, the food can sector has suddenly become a lifeline because American inputs are too expensive. A new plant in Windsor is expected to create more than 100 jobs and produce 1.2 billion cans a year by 2028. But experts warn the payback period for such investments can stretch 8 to 10 years.
Building a plant is always a challenge because you have to know what will be the payback period for your investment, and so usually payback periods are at least 8 to 10 years.
That does little for workers who need stability now. Ontario's auto sector faces higher costs for steel frames and aluminum parts, squeezing every step from stamping to assembly. Municipalities are struggling to replace essential equipment. Reports highlight fire trucks built with U.S. steel that now cost millions more and take years to deliver. Statistics Canada notes Windsor unemployment remains above 10%, among the highest in Canada. Quebec's aluminum producers warn about layoffs if tariffs persist. These are not abstract numbers. They are paychecks, mortgages, and grocery bills. Add a weakened Canadian dollar, and the burden grows heavier. Families feel the squeeze each month, while Ottawa insists on patience. Donald Trump thrives on unpredictability. One day he praises Carney as a friend, the next he threatens to tighten the screws further. By pulling back most counter-tariffs while keeping only a narrow list, Carney handed him the advantage. Ottawa claims Canada still holds many cards, but the first card played was retreat, and that message matters. It tells Trump that Canada will endure economic pain without forcing concessions in return. Steel and aluminum were supposed to be pillars of the Canadian economy. Instead, they remain in the crosshairs, bleeding under tariffs, while Carney preaches strategic patience. The result is higher costs, anxious workers, and industries in limbo. Trump can already claim victory without lifting a finger. For Canadians, that means heavier bills, fewer jobs, and more uncertainty. And the harsh reality is this: if Ottawa calls this patience, then the battle still ahead could be far more punishing.